evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mountain Minds Monday, a program of Tahoe Silicon Mountain. It's time for the main event. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about our sponsors. We don't currently have a gold sponsor, and so you have the ability to bring your business into that role. Here is the link for how you can get a hold of us, or if you prefer email, listed here as well. We do have a wide variety of community partners, including Nevada County Tech Connection, Tahoe Truckee Media. Don't you love their new logo? The Truckee Airport District, Lyft Co-work, where we hold our first Friday at 4. The Town of Truckee Chamber is a community partner of ours, and we have to thank Pizza on the Hill for hosting us here. Again, sponsorship opportunities. I'd also like to thank our individual sponsors. So we do have a program for individual sponsors, not just business sponsors. You can become an individual sponsor for just $150 per year, so just $12.50 per event. And that does allow us to put on the live stream and continue operating, as we are a 501c3 nonprofit. You also have the ability to support us by choosing us as the nonprofit of choice for your Amazon Smile purchases. So if you're not already hooked up with a nonprofit when you're purchasing things on Amazon, it's really easy to sign up for, and you can select a nonprofit, and we would love if you selected us. So on to the main event. I'm super excited about this, Unlocking the Mystery of Coffee. And I'm going to have our 3 panelists introduce themselves and give a few slides of background information. So they'll probably each speak for about 5 minutes. And then after that, I have a list of prepared questions for them. We'll get through as much of that as we can in about 20 minutes. And then the remaining 20 minutes is for all of you to ask questions. And I'll get to the audience questions faster if I can, because I know there were a lot of people who said that they're big coffee drinkers and can't wait to ask questions. So first off, Scott Coleman from Glory Cloud Roasters.
Thank you, Ellen. Scott Coleman. My wife and I founded Glory Cloud about 2.5 years ago, and it was a change of life for us. So here's all the contact info if you want to learn about us. We artisan craft roast coffee in Sparks, Nevada, and we also do loose leaf tea because we want 98% of the planet drinking our products. And it's good to be part of Coffeeholics Anonymous, which this table over here is obviously part of. So half of my team came from Mercedes-Benz Reno. We wanted to start a new company that was treating people with honor and respect. So our motto is honor all. Honor comes from a Greek word which means 2 things: to respect people and to value products. So Timo, which is where you get honor from, is what we're all about. So it started first with the people. I wanted to find the right people and then pursue the product and find a place where we could do that after AutoNation came in and made my brother an offer he couldn't refuse. So the corporation took over the car dealership. We went to another one that was not run with respect. It was the Good Old Boy Network, the stereotypical stuff that was really frustrating to deal with. And we wanted to make a difference in the world, and we wanted to treat people really well. And it took a little while to find the right people to help with the product. I had the business people and the sales and customer service people, but I needed to find the product. So my wife and I went to Portland to visit our daughter up there and stumbled across a family friend who was up there roasting for Groundwork Coffee Company. And he was really frustrated. And we had a bunch of conversations and said, why should we start a new coffee company? Isn't Reno Sparks saturated? And he said, no, it's got about a 1/6 to an 1/8 of what you see in Portland, Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, and LA. So then I asked him, how would we be different? Other than you're a coffee and tea wizard, what would make us different? And it was all about how you treated people, how you trained them from their position and built them up and helped them grow and learn and educate and move on economically as people, rather than just, you're a barista, stay there. You're a roaster, stay there. You're this, stay there. So our business model was all about treating people with amazing respect. So here's our San Franciscan roaster, which is made in Carson City. If you travel the area, if you travel within about a 50-mile area of Carson City, probably close to half of the roasting companies have a San Franciscan roaster. They make these from scratch, from sheet metal. Ours is painted with their standard colors, not nearly as cool as David's at Coffeebar, which is orange and white and just freaking awesome. Ours looks like a locomotive. And a friend of mine was in Guatemala a few years ago, and he is a professional photographer who used to shoot for Porsche USA and a bunch of other people. So this is his trip to Guatemala, and you can see those cherries on this coffee shrub tree. It's like a short tree. It's a shrub where you get coffees from. It's a cherry, and inside of that are the seeds, which look like beans, so therefore we call them beans. Did you know that? You're actually roasting coffee seeds, so we call them beans. This is the inside of our facility, so we've got lots of space for events, for coffee and tea training, for team building, hosting networking events. We have people come in a lot just to hang out and visit and learn about coffee and tea. Up at the top is the whole process, from an immature to the cherries, to the picked cherries, to a French roasted coffee. And then here's a quick and dirty. This is one of the few espresso machines not made in Italy. Italy wants to control the worldwide market on espresso machines. It's our espresso. So this is made in Seattle, Washington, and I heard that there is an Italian company trying to purchase Slayer. So in the top are the cherry seeds that, after they've been processed, these are the raw beans that then go through the roasting process, obviously light to darkest. So here's your light to medium roast, your French, and then your burnt. So, and it is amazing. A lot of people, because they've grown up with this type of coffee, that's how they describe coffee. So as they're saying, I need something bold and strong, they really want this stuff, and we don't like to drink it, but they do. So I'll give it to them. They can buy it from us. We'll make it if you want. We had one customer that did a taste test, and this was what they wanted as their bean in their t-shirt souvenir shop, in their private label shop. Somebody came in and found it and drank it and loved it, and then came to us and said, I want that coffee for their franchise donut shop. If you're part of a franchise, you know you are supposed to buy from headquarters select coffee. So they're doing this secret, therefore they will remain unnamed. So I'm not going to tell you who that was. So coffee is a really interesting thing with how you get the stuff that you like. What is your palate used to, and then you can go through, and after you taste a bunch of them, you'll figure out what stuff you really like. In these lighter to medium roasts, you're gonna get all kinds of amazing sugars and caramelizations and yummy nuances. Coffee actually has something like 300 more chemical compounds than wine. Did you know that? It's very unique, and the taste differences in the bean from South America to Central America to Africa to Asia are very distinct and very unique. So how you roast it and the location are amazing. We have a different roast profile for every bean from every country that we get it from. And then we have to go through this beauty through a computer with our roast recipe on a laptop with our graphs and charts to tell us how to roast, how to adapt the roast. Because strange things, even though Nevada is down there, Sparks is very dry. If a storm comes in, that affects how I roast based on the humidity coming through. Not only that, that affects how we grind our espresso and put it through the espresso machine. You have to change your grind in order to get the right weight out on the coffee. So things can change drastically with just a wet cloud, even if the rain never hits the ground, which is kind of Reno rain. It rains to about here and then it's gone. That's not me. So that's the quick, one little thing. You've seen the coffee bags, the burlap bags that most of it comes in? This is called a Grain Pro bag. And this bag is about a 6-layer plastic mylar bag to keep the moisture content inside the beans so that they don't dry out and then taste like your bag after you've roasted them. You don't want your beans to taste baggy. That's what they mean when they say baggy. It's tasting like the burlap. So this helps it stay fresher longer. So that's for the green beans, but once you roast it, you don't have a whole lot of time. And I'm sure we'll get to that in the Q&A. So I'll save some time for that, give it back to Ellen. Thank you very much.
So as Scott mentioned, we met through 1 Million Cups down in Reno, which supports the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the whole Reno Tahoe area. We send people down from Truckee all the time to present their burgeoning businesses. And the way that we filled out the panel was that I talked to Sierra Business Council, who is our partner in Pitch Camp and Pitch Showcase, and asked them who else we needed to have on the panel. And so I'm excited to introduce Gail to talk about her 2 local coffee businesses.
Hi, I'm Gail. I think I want to clear up a question I get all the time, which is I purchased an existing business, Sierra Pacific Coffee Company, 4 years ago. And that is the foundation of my business. However, it was really important for me to find my own footprint in this business. So I developed an entire line of coffees that is Twisted Tree coffee. They are completely different beans from one to the other. So Twisted Tree coffee are women farmed coffee, solely women from around the world that farm beans, from farming to harvesting to processing to marketing and sales. It is who I am in this business. However, Sierra Pacific Coffee has allowed me this opportunity. So I have 2 lines of coffee. So just to clear up that question a little bit. So I want to talk quickly through this, and this is hard to talk quick about, but my topics are why fair trade coffee, why organic coffees, and why women in coffee. So as you can see, you want to talk about a clunker machine, that's what I roast on. I roast on a Diedrich 25 kilogram machine, 50 kilograms, 25 pounds I roast. I'm an artisan small batch roaster. I do not use automation. I use sight, sound, color, my senses. I'm really in tune to my roast when I'm at the machine. And I do document everything as well so that I can duplicate something that's really awesome. And even if I make a mistake and it works out for me, we repeat it. And I know how to because we document. So one of the big questions that I hear is, why are we paying more for fair trade? Fair trade is a classification of certifications for many products around, from textiles to coconuts to beans. And why is it important? It is so important that we purchase beans at a fair price to the farmer so that those farmers can make a livable wage. So not just women in farming, but just farmers in general. It's also important that we look at fair trade for gender equality. Children not being forced into labor on these farms. Women having the right to have a voice and be involved in fair trade. So there's there's a lot of reasons. These farmers are poor. They're very, very poor. And we're giving them a chance to make a fair wage. So what we pay as a minimum price, we add on a certain percentage or 10 cents, 20 cents just for their fair trade certification. So then why organics? We all know eating organic food is important, but we can be assured that if the farms have an organic certification, they are not genetically modifying their beans, their plants. We know they're not using pesticides and toxic herbicides. We know that those are terrible for our aquifers and we get sludge. There's a lot of waste from coffee, and we want that to be used properly and to teach our farmers how to reuse some of those byproducts so they are not filtering into the water systems in these villages so that these people aren't drinking that stuff. Why women? I think I'd believe in this even if I wasn't a woman. I come by this naturally to want to care about women on the planet. My mother was a seroptimist for 45 years, and you know what that is. That's dedication to women. And even though she didn't talk much about it, it oozed from her. And I must have picked up the bug because I really, really believe in women in coffee. Women in these villages often are very undereducated, very isolated. They're abused emotionally, sexually, physically. Approximately 65% of these women in these countries are abused women. If we can help them to come up with their own products and teach them and give them the tools they need and the money they need to get a good product out the door for us to enjoy, as educated women, they gain a higher respect in their communities, their families. And this is interesting. One of the visible impacts right now that we're seeing, because these women are producing for the families now, the men are beginning to take a more active role in their families and their children's day-to-day activities, household chores. It's really quite unheard of. So there's a lot of reasons to love supporting women farm coffees. The organizations that I'm involved in are beautifully structured to where the women own the deeds to their land. It's required. All their coffees are fair trade organics, and we write the checks to the women. The women get the voice to tell us what they need for their villages, for their farms, for their children's health, their education. It's really a beautiful, beautiful cause, and we are seeing reductions in abuse, and we're pretty all about that too. So this is what matters a lot to me. This is what Twisted Tree stands for, but within my other line of coffees, I also do as much organic as I possibly can, and as much fair trade. But this defines my two brands, and this is where my heart really lies, is in this women farm products.
So here in Tahoe, we hear that we came for the winter and stayed for the summer. So this next speaker, I went for the pastries and stayed for the coffee. So David Wilson here to talk about Coffeebar.
Wilson. I'm the director of coffee for Coffeebar. Assuming you guys are familiar with it, it's been around for about 9 years in Truckee now. But in the last few years, we've expanded both into Reno and in the Bay Area. We now have 7 cafes across both states and a roastery in Midtown Reno. So as for the coffee, I'm not going to be insulted by that because for the longest time we did not roast our own coffee. That's a recent development. So yeah, Coffeebar's been going. I joined the program about 2 years ago, and I have experience for about 6 years in specialty coffee. So roasting, importing. I worked at Origin in Guatemala as a coffee importer, and then came back to create the roasting program when Coffeebar decided to bring all of its coffee production in-house and really take control of that element of the product. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. The roaster that Scott is so jealous of, right there, made down in Carson City, the San Francisco roaster. So this is our roastery in Midtown Reno. The reason I have this up here is talk about my role. I'm director of coffee for Coffeebar. So that means that I take control of the product all the way from origin right the way through to the product that you're served in the cafes. And this is a huge part of that because we really focus on the quality of the coffee, the roasting, everything we do with that, roast profiles, creating something unique for each coffee that we produce, and all the way through to the training of the baristas and the production levels within the cafes. So this is we have 2 locations in Reno now, both in Midtown, and this is where we do all our production, about 1,200 pounds a week roasted out of this space, and also have a high-level specialty cafe. But it's more than just what we serve in the cafes, and it's more than just finding the perfect profile for whatever coffee we happen to be roasting or wanting to serve. It's about what happens down at Origin. Gale kind of went on about this a little bit, which is because it's something super important. What we're having impact with our purchasing. We talk about the community that coffee is, and in Coffeebar we say we want to make that community a little wider. We want to make it a global kind of thing. So these are producers that I worked with. I lived down for a year in Guatemala, working in quality control with an organization, a non-profit importer known as De La Gente, which works with 5 cooperatives around Guatemala. So the way we source coffee is we don't work fair trade, but we try and work with something that embodies that idea. And most times, well, all times, it pays above fair trade minimums, what we do. So like these producers are ones that otherwise wouldn't have specialty market access. So our goal is to be invested to such a level at the origin countries where we work that we can find producers that otherwise wouldn't have a buyer and create a market for them. And then we work with them. These guys here are an example of winners of a microlot competition. So a few years ago, they didn't know anything about coffee processing. They picked the cherries and they sold it to the mill, and then the mill would sell it on to the States. Since then, they've been trained. They've learned how to produce their own coffee. They now take pride in the work that each of them does individually, and they're able to enter those lots separately, each producer, instead of just putting them all together as a blend. And each producer is able to get a reward for the quality that they're able to produce. So it's about empowering the producers to both take control of their product and improve their product, and by doing, improve their economic sustainability. So a lot of our work is that. We've been in Costa Rica, Colombia, Guatemala this year, and I'll be on a plane to Uganda in a week. The main goals of that is we work with importers that we trust already, but occasionally you have to just be there to make the connections and really go the next level with what you're doing and what you're producing. So I'll be in Uganda consulting on coffee processing, because the idea is the higher quality they can produce, the more access to markets they get. We can purchase their coffee ourselves, but the goal is always to get them to a level where they gain access to a broader market. It's one thing for us to offer to buy a coffee and just commit to them, but that doesn't allow them growth. So we work with them in producing, in improving their quality across the board. So yeah, I was in Guatemala last week. These are producers I've worked with, and yeah, all of our coffee is sourced on that kind of methodology, and that's really what we're trying to grow. We've been doing roasting for 2 years, and yeah, I think we're going to get rolling on questions and answers now. So I do not. Back to you.
Bring the chairs up and have you guys go up. Yeah. for the three of you to share. Well, it is going to turn a little bit more technical now. This is Tahoe Silicon Mountain, and so you can imagine the questions that are going to come. But I'll start with a little bit of a softball question. What got you into this in the first place? Was there an aha moment that made you think, I want to have a career in coffee?
I don't know if there was so much an aha moment as a slow descent into the madness. I was an architect in former life, and so was well acquainted with coffee as a product. Going through architecture school, you get used to a lot of it. But I loved cafes first and coffee second. And then when I decided to leave architecture and pursue another career, whatever that might be, I started working in a cafe, just have the experience so that I could be a part of that culture, and then discovered a love for coffee and kind of saw what went into the background of it, a little more than just pouring latte out in a cafe, but what all goes into that cup of coffee, and then slowly went down and down the rabbit hole.
I was in my early 20s when I was touched by Montana coffee traders, and I would just go there and I would smell it, and I would watch them roasting. I just thought it was so cool, and then I found out more about it, and it was all the goodness the owner was doing for the planet, caring about the source where coffee came from, helping the villagers, building schools, building hospitals. He just emanated good, and I loved that. And so that was my aha moment in my 20s, but then it went on the back burner till I was almost 60. And when I had the opportunity to buy a coffee roasting business, I had always wanted it. And I was a home roaster, so I had been working with, there's grading of coffees, and I was working with 99 plus coffees. I could, it was, I'd buy a gram or 90 grams of coffee. It was only $11, and it was the best. So I got really touched, and I would put on these little events, and people would want me to bring my coffee. I was roasting on a 90-gram machine, and I'd pull off enough coffee to go do a Christmas fair. I got the bug. I thought, I need to do this, and I need to do it bigger. So when I had the opportunity, I said, no regrets, age doesn't matter, we're gonna do this.
I didn't drink coffee till I was at least 35 because I didn't like the stuff that my parents made and said that they liked coffee. I thought this stuff tastes nasty. Why are people drinking this? And then I started a new job where I was working second and third shift and started to slam a lot of coffee and just for the caffeine and didn't like it. So it really wasn't until 3.5 years ago when I met Hayden Moore, who's the Q grader for us, the coffee wizard, and he started to roast coffee, and I tasted his stuff and went, it can actually taste good? That's amazing. And then we started exploring teas, and I thought, that can taste good, and it's got antioxidants and health benefits, and you can change the world. So he was the product guy, and my passion in life was to unleash people and to empower them to have opportunities that they didn't have before and they didn't have in other locations. So it was the cohesion of both of those that helped draw me into coffee and tea, and now we're coffee and teaholics.
So Scott's the first one who got me to drink coffee without sugar. I usually add enough sugar and cream to make it taste like coffee ice cream, and he explained and led me to the one that I could taste without sugar, so thank you for that. So you mentioned Q grader. Can you guys explain what Q grader is and what kinds of trainings and certifications you all had getting into the business?
Q grader was the most stressful 2 weeks of my life. It's maybe equivalent to kind of advanced sommelier level. So it's a certification that's recognized worldwide. I think there are about 5,000 currently globally. And the idea originally was to create a link between the producing and the consuming side. that all get certified on how to taste coffee, and with the goal being that I could give a score on a coffee that I tasted here in Truckee, and somebody in Guatemala could give a score on that same coffee, and we'd be talking the same language. So in the future, when I speak to them about how good's your coffee, and they say 85, I know what that means. So it's since been turned into a really robust program by the Specialty Coffee Association, and the process, it's a week-long course building into it, and 21 examinations based on palate distinctions, so picking out different coffees, acidity in coffee, roast levels, roast defects, triangulations, cuppings of coffees from around the world. And yeah, that's Q grading.
It's even more complicated than what he's not building himself up enough. It's an 80% failure rate, and there's only one written test, so the other 20 are all about your palate, your tongue, your nose. They even have a test where they put a red light in there so you can't see the acid that they drop in one of the cups, and you have to distinguish which cup has the acid and what kind of acid is in it. So he's a super taster. So it's absolutely amazing the nuances that Q graders can distinguish in the flavors and descriptions of it, and there's less than 400 of them in the US. So
I didn't say it.
So Gail, I know I read on your website that you went and got some formal training as you got into the business as well. What kinds of training did you go through?
Well, trial and error. I mean, I went to the School of Hard Knocks learning coffee. But I was going to start a coffee shop. So I'd always wanted to roast, but I was going to start a coffee shop. So I went to Texas Coffee School in Dallas. And I got schooled in coffee and in coffee business. And it was so well done and such great training that when I left, everybody else in the class was super excited. They were going to go start their coffee shop for minimum $150,000, $200,000 to start up a coffee shop. And I walked away, just couldn't identify what was I feeling. And I realized this just showed me how much more I want to be just a coffee roaster. So that was kind of a really great first step for me, to not go do a storefront first, but to learn. I learned what the storefronts are looking for, but I got to be the back end of it. I got to be focused on just coffee roasting. So from there, I went on and I got my Specialty Coffee Association roaster certification, and I took the first online class that was offered through Boot Camp for Coffee in San Rafael, from seed to cup. I am not a Q grader, but I work with my broker is a Q grader and a very good friend that I entrust his palate. As you can see why I would. The training is so complex. So he and I work hand in hand, but I always get samples of coffee that he thinks I might be interested in, and then we have a back and forth about what we think about the coffee. So it's a really good team effort working with the Q grader.
So we live over 6,000 feet here in Truckee, and I've heard mentioned before that altitude comes into play in where the beans come from and what altitude they're roasted at. Can you talk a little bit about where altitude comes into play on what all of you are doing?
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial in coffee production. So the coffee belt is all equatorial regions, but high elevation. And so the primary element of elevation in coffee production is to cool the temperatures. It's not about the actual elevation, it's about the temperatures that you maintain at that level. So tropical regions, high elevation, maintain a consistently cooler temperature without going below freezing. So that's largely what contributes to coffee growth. Other factors play in, like shade, and access to like breeze and things like that can also play a similar role. That's the primary role of elevation in coffee production, roasting specifically.
say that specialty coffee is considered at a certain elevation and higher. So what you get with a high-grown bean is a very dense bean. They're slower growers. They're dense. So how do we roast those specialty high-grown beans? Being denser, heavier, more complex flavors we can get from a bean like that. Our tagline is roasted with altitude. Like that's, if I talk to Boot Camp for Coffee about roasting at elevation, he says, you know what, the only thing that really does for you is you have to calibrate your machine more often. So barometric pressure, so on and so forth at elevation will change some of the calibration.
Any wine drinkers in here? So you're familiar with how they score wine? If in Napa, if you go there and all the wines on the lower elevation they can only really get up to a certain scoring. The stuff on the hill has had to fight harder to thrive, so it becomes denser. The grapes become denser and more nuanced and more flavorful. Well, the seed's fairly similar in that density creates new types of sugar and caramelization processes that are inside that bean. The bean has a honeycomb structure, so as you go through the roasting process at about 380 degrees, it starts to go through first crack and it starts to pop open, and you start to have a caramelization phase where as it's going from kind of a tan to a brown color and caramelizing, the sugars are starting to change and you're starting to get unique flavors out of that by how much gas you apply, by how much air flow is inside the drum, which we have to take into consideration with our elevation. I'm at about 4,400 feet where we roast in sparks. So all of that stuff brings in the science to it along with the art, and the flavors change drastically based on the density of that bean, the water content, the moisture of the bean, which is why you've got the Grain Pro to keep the moisture inside of the green bean before you roast it. So it has all kinds of art and science mixed into it. And that's why all of us say, hey, come and take a look, learn the process, come in and check them out and see and enjoy it. It's really fun to take a tour of them. So come on over.
So most of us are going to buy our beans from you already roasted. And so our next step is grinding it. And there's all kinds of grinders we could have access to. Can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of grinders we should have and what we get from the different grinders?
Burr Grinders.
So it's like a gear inside a transaxle that tears apart that honeycomb structure of the bean so you get equal sized particles. If you have a blade grinder, like a blender, what happens is the blade is popping the beans up and down, so you get boulders all the way down to dust is how they describe it. So they're different sizes of particles. So that dust, the fines at the bottom, are very acidic and bitter. So if you've ever had a cup of coffee and it gives you a stomach ache, it's usually because of that stuff at the bottom. That's the quick and dirty.
I was just going to add, we talk about Burr Grinders obviously because we use them in the cafes, but they do cost quite a bit for home use. It's kind of obscene. But you can get really wonderful hand Burr Grinders for home to replace a blade grinder, and it does have a huge effect just by keeping consistency of grind size. So for a much smaller price, yeah, you get a little workout in the morning, but definitely worth it for home brewing.
So given that, should we buy it already ground?
The structure of the bean obviously holds a lot of chemicals that break down during roasting and create those flavors and notes. So the moment you grind it, you're beginning to lose. I think I had a friend once who talked about brewing coffee in the morning. Oh, I was trying to A lighter roast single origin, you definitely don't want to grind into the moment before you're brewing it. A darker roast, you might have a little more wiggle room.
I would say if you're going to buy ground coffee, buy local, because it's probably a lot fresher than other ground coffees you're going to find in a grocery store. I know we stock our grocery stores 4 days a week, and that's rotated, so all the new coffees go behind. Those coffees aren't older than a week that I grind, and they taste pretty darn good. There's a lot of convenience buying ground coffee. We grind on a Burr Grinder, so your grind in itself is going to be consistent, and you're going to get a good brew. Whole bean is always best, but
Totally agreed. Some people just don't have that convenience. We are slowly converting the world to fresh ground coffee. We try and encourage people to not go with the K-cups, because in order to package them, they have to be ground and then sit around and go stale before they can even seal them. So you're not actually getting a fresh cup of coffee. You're not. And then you can't clean the darn things anyways. They got all this black gooey stuff inside if you try to clean them. So we're trying not to be snobs, but if you want the best flavor, fresher is better. I accidentally discovered a few things that you don't want to grind it within like 2 days of when it's been roasted, or you'll get an Alka-Seltzer effect where it's bubbling out. All that CO2 and the other gases will overflow your brew basket and just make a mess everywhere. So there's a little bit of a time frame from when it's roasted, wait about 3 days so it's degassed a little bit, and then you can grind and do it within an hour or so. So you'll be able to taste the difference. You can have stuff that's ground and sitting on the counter in a sunlight blocked cool location, not in your fridge or freezer, and you'll get a great cup. The difference is it'll slowly go downhill over time and become more stale.
Like when we buy it already roasted but not yet ground.
I've done some testing, I'm sure we all have. How long is coffee good as a whole bean? I've had coffee that's 9 months old as whole beans, and I swear it gets better. Why? I don't know if it just, being stored in a glass container, in a pantry, not out in the light, not exposed to different temperatures. But I would say consume it within 3 months. That would be ideal, is under 3 months in my opinion. But it still can be good later on. I find a lot of coffees mellow and just become better.
Yeah, it's true. It's a hard question to answer because each coffee is going to be different. You have an effect of too fresh coffee, like Scott was talking about, where the coffee contains too much gas trapped in the cell structure. So as you're trying to brew it, the gas is forcing its way out and actually slowing down your extraction. So you're not going to wake up too old and you've lost some of those volatile compounds. So each coffee is going to have a range, and it'll change as well. So you might like it better at a certain point of that. Within our shops, we kind of brew 3 days to 2 weeks, but fully recognizing I've had coffees that I did not like for the first week, and then a month off roast came back and just blown away. So it's going to depend on the coffee as well as the roast level, how those change.
The only other thing I'd add is if you've got a light or medium roast coffee that you've had sitting around for a while, if the oils start to come to the outside of that, it's probably bad. It's going stale as the oil starts to extract from the shell.
So what's your favorite brewing method? What's your favorite cup of coffee?
AeroPress. I love an AeroPress. I have a counter of all brewing methods, but my go-to is an AeroPress. And there's a couple reasons. It's a beautiful full body cup. I'm a single origin medium roast
before of a method. It's called Colita Wave. If you've seen Chemex's or B60s, it's very similar in style to that. You're essentially just pouring coffee on consistently and letting it drip straight through. The Colita, though, has a flat bottom controlled flow rate, so it helps with consistency of extraction. And really great for like medium, light roast coffees. It produces a really clean cup, so you get a lot of clarity and complexity.
The couple times a day thing is hilarious because I'll have some hot ones and then some cold ones. It's really interesting just trying them and differently. Some days you're in a different mood. If I only had one to choose from ever, it would be a cold brewed coffee. The reason for that is I like how the coffee grounds in a cold brew, not hot ever, it changes the way the sugars are drawn out of the bean, and the acid doesn't really come out. It's very smooth and a little bit sweet. So for a sweet tooth, that's my preferred method after I've had like espresso Americano. All on the same day.
So start getting your questions ready. I'm going to ask them one more question as you guys get ready to raise your hands, and we'll pass the mic around. If someone's interested in becoming more knowledgeable, what resources would you suggest for researching from home, different things that we can try?
Well, it depends on what area of interest they are. Are they interested in roasting? Are they interested in starting a coffee shop, or just interested in home roasting? Home roasting is really fun. It's really fun. Best beans in the world, small amounts, doesn't cost too much. I have to say, go to Texas Coffee School if you want to get educated. It is so well done. It's a great investment, and there's a wide range of areas of knowledge you can get skilled at, from barista to coffee shop ownership to latte art to cupping to all the different grind methods, all the different brewing methods. It's wonderful.
I'm a millennial, just barely, so I'm going to say YouTube. But more specifically, you've probably never heard of it, but there are such a thing as World Barista Championships. And the way that's structured is a barista who spent like a full-time job training to do this creates a series of drinks for judges, but they explain the way through them. So they're talking about the process in the coffee, where they got it from, how the farmer created, how they roasted, the style, and then how they're extracting it. So honestly, if you want to learn like the ridiculous science that goes into all of this, watch a 10-minute United States Barista Championship routine, and they'll talk you all through. You'll probably mind blown. I don't know, in a good way or a bad way, but they'll talk you all the way through, and it's kind of amazing to watch.
Yeah, do you want the red pill or the blue pill? The rabbit hole goes really deep. If you're a reader, go to SCA.org, Specialty Coffee Association. There's also the National Coffee Association, NCA. If you love YouTube, you can look up all kinds of videos. One of my favorite guys to watch is the real Chris Baca. He's also roasting on our same roaster. His is baby blue. Like your shirt, very nice. That's the quick and easy. It can go on.
Great. First question from the audience.
Hi, thanks so much. That was really interesting. Coffee apparently comes from anywhere but here, so it has to get here a long ways. How does shipping play into quality, into price, into sustainability for your businesses?
First off, there's coffee being grown in Southern California that'll cost you a small fortune and won't be very good, but it does exist in the United States. And Hawaii, yes. But yeah. So it's a massive. It can be a massive issue, honestly, because depending where the coffee's coming from, overland it can be less than a month coming in from Central America, versus coffees from East Africa can be 2 months just on the water. The coffee we bring in from Uganda sometimes takes a month or two just overland transit to get to a port to leave from there, and it's 2+ months on the water. do everything we can to mitigate those factors with specialty coffee and measuring water activity levels, moisture levels, getting those as consistent as possible so that the coffee's not influenced by external factors as it's shipping. Grain flow, like Scott talked about earlier, can help mitigate some of that. So we're constantly working on how to improve it. But even with that, I expect coffees to land a point lower in score from what I cupped before they left when they air freighted samples over to what they come in. So something we're always concerned about and paying attention to when with our contracts is that awareness.
I let my broker deal with all of those headaches because he's the expert. I don't direct trade. You do. I'm just not an expert there yet. So until I know more about how to do that and have the finances to support freighters of coffee, I just work with my broker.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is we have different meters, so you can measure the moisture content of the beans that you get as the samples, and then you can measure the moisture content of what you get in the bags. They're typically 60 to 62 kilo, kind of in the maybe a little bit lower now, 132 to 154 pound bags of green coffee beans. And you measure those when you get them to verify that what you got as a sample is the same product that you got. And if it's not, then you talk to your importer and say, this is not the same bag. I want to ship this back and get the real stuff.
Just as a drinker, I got into coffee as a grad student at Cal at Pete's Coffee Shop when there was only Pete's and Starbucks did not even exist. And I had my own blend on a card file there, 80% of their house dark roast and 20% espresso roast. And all my friends loved it, and they would go in and ask for John Henry's blend, and they'd pull up the card, and that's what they'd make for them. But it was literally, I think, 40 years later when, yes, I was grinding it every day, whole dark beans, and making it drip coffee style. But I was wondering, why did coffee always taste better in France? My opinion at the time. So I bought a French press, made it side by side with my regular coffee maker and my French press. Same beans, fresh ground, everything identical. I've always made it with a French press ever since. But now I'm going to have to go with the AeroPress. Okay, so I thank you. This has been very enlightening, but But do you have a comment on just the difference it would make going from a drip coffee maker even to a French press? Or no, maybe.
Yes, I mean, all methods of brewing are wonderful. It's what do you like? What are you looking for? What is your palate like? I love a full body. And I don't mean strong to where it's bitter. I mean, I want to taste the beauty of the bean, whatever that is. If I'm drinking something from Ethiopia, there's characteristics of that bean, and I can pull them out of my AeroPress. My French press, I was hooked on French press for many years until I found the AeroPress. It gave me more body, and I like that. You're welcome. Something more to buy.
Only at Gale.
Make it an investment.
I'm going to go off tangent a bit and comment on that coffee tastes better in France. And something we kind of forget a little bit is how much a cultural thing it is and how much it's about the relationship and who you're having coffee with. We get obsessed about Q grading a coffee that might score 90 points when we're back here, but some of the best coffee I ever had was the rejected lot from La Suiza, which is Camino in Guatemala, and it was brewed very weak, not even cowboy coffee, with a heat, probably as much sugar as coffee in there, and I just downed a bucket of that. And if I tasted that again, I'd probably be horrified. But in the moment, it's one of the best coffees I've ever had. So it plays such a huge role as experience.
I think it's because you were in France, period.
Yeah, What's her name? That's very true. Your food and drink is an emotional experience, and you're tied into that. That's why Jamaican and Hawaiian coffees sell a lot, but they're at a lower elevation, so they really don't score as well as a lot of these other high elevation coffees, so they don't taste as well in a blind taste test. So location, location, location is very important to the emotional experience of it. As far as the French press, AeroPress versus the other ones, the coffees that are going through a paper filter, some of the oils are going to get stuck in the filter or sit still in the grounds. In the AeroPress and the French press, you're going to get a more full-bodied coffee, which means your mouth is going to feel more of the acids in the body of that coffee. So the way you describe it, it will feel different in your mouth, and then some of the aromatics are going to change, so what you're smelling while you're drinking it will drastically change. So if you taste these things side by side, then you can say, you can do the same coffee, all these different methods, and then go, okay, I like this coffee that way, I like that coffee that way. It's a deep, deep rabbit hole.
Hi, I'm Tom, and I've got a coffee problem. And if I could get your help, my stovetop's at 6,503 feet, and which means my water's boiling on any given day between 198 and 201. What's your advice in terms of the water I'm using? Can I use it immediately, the cool, or do I need to actually get it into a pressure system and to increase the temperature?
I personally would have it, take it to a boil and give it 30 seconds off the boil. I set my kettle at 198.
What style of coffee do you drink? What roast level? For a darker roast, I'd agree with Gail. You want it a little bit lower. Recommended SCA brewing temps is about 195 to 205. So with a lighter roast, you want the highest extraction value possible. So the higher the water temperature, the better, up to 205, which means up here, straight off the boil for a light roast, and you're golden. With a darker roast, you can over-extract if you have too high a water temperature. Same with time and everything, but temperature is a variable. So with a darker roast, I would drop even down as low as 185 on temp, but 30 seconds off will bring you into the kind of lower 190s, and for a darker roast, it would be ideal. Nailed it.
I have a question.
Hang on a second. It is funny
sorry.
about the elevation stuff where we are at Sparks at 4,400. We're at 203. And then let it come down a little bit.
You may have mentioned this earlier, but a lot of your description of the elevation and altitude part reminded me of winemaking, and so I was curious about soil and also sun aspects in addition to altitude.
As far as, I didn't understand what the question part
I was
was.
just curious if with wine, soil types and sun aspects also have quite a significant effect as well as the weather and elevation. So I was just curious if that's the case with coffee too.
Absolutely. I had a gentleman come in the other day and said, I don't like shade-grown coffee. I went, wow, that's really specific. Why? And he said they're not sweet enough for him. I really think that higher grown shade is a protection. It allows the beans to develop to their fullest without being damaged as much from weather storms coming through, and soil. Everything matters when you're growing plant. So I'm not specific.
Yeah, shade is a crucial factor. Almost all specialty coffees you get will be shade grown, and the reason it ties into elevation, how it's cooler temperatures that it's growing in, it's slowing down the growth of the bean. So the longer it takes for the bean to reach maturation, the longer it has to develop acids and sugars. So it's going to be more concentrated with acids and sugars, more flavor, more sweetness. So shade is a contributing factor to that alongside elevation. Soil type is massively important, but it kind of goes hand in hand with varietals. So there's not just one type of coffee. It's just like wine. You have all the different grapes. We have all different coffee beans. So a lot of them are regional specific, some are more global. But what those beans inherently have, that varietal, the acids that it develops inherently, will also be affected by the soil type that it's growing in and create distinct flavors for each region.
I'm going to go off topic since they nailed it on that. The other things to consider with that is there's really two types of coffee that are sold globally. Arabica, which is the craft coffee that tastes fantastic, and the soils drastically change how it tastes from South America to Africa. The other type of coffee you may have heard of is Robusta. Heard of that? No? The higher caffeine coffee, it's not the specialty grade, it's not the craft coffee, it's got about twice the caffeine content, and caffeine makes things taste bitter. So if anybody is saying that they have a craft coffee that has higher caffeine content, that is marketing baloney. They've either had to add Robusta beans into that, or they're actually putting powdered caffeine on it, which will then make the coffee taste bitter. So if you really want the best tasting coffee, you go with Arabica. If you just need a caffeine buzz, you can go with the Robusta, or you can just chew nicotine pills.
Can I just add one thing on there, because there's a really cool development happening in the industry right now. With climate change and other factors creeping in, there have been global outbreaks of kind of coffee leaf rust, which is a fungus that attacks the plants, and its warmer temperatures aid that. So it's kind of affecting more and more coffee growers as we go. So there's a lot of work happening in hybridization. There's a spontaneous hybrid between those two types, between Arabica and Robusta. It happened on East Timor, and they've used that spontaneous hybridization to then mix it with other Arabica coffees, and so create ones that have better resistance. Because Robusta, it's grown at lower elevations, has more resistance. The extra caffeine is actually a deterrent to pests, so it's more resistance. So they're starting to work with crossing those. It's multiple generations as they get it from seed and keep going. But a lot of the coffee is starting to see, and especially it's creeping into specialty. We had a Costa Rica that's a Mazies varietal. A lot of the coffee coming out of Colombia is being planted as these hybrid varietals that kind of have the best of both worlds. Is the idea. It's a huge thing happening at Orange right now.
One last fun question. So there's food and wine pairings. What do you eat while you drink coffee?
Well, I drink coffee in the morning mostly until I start drinking coffee in the afternoon. So for breakfast, I'd love to pair it with the Ecuadorian chocolate paste truffle. But I shouldn't. So I wait until I have my cold brew in the afternoon. I also am a brewer. I cold brew and I nitro and do all of that with coffee. So that's when I will have that Ecuadorian chocolate.
I was going to say chocolate also. Yeah, so chocolates with the coffees, but that's because I have more of a sweet tooth, so I like the Africans that have a little bit of a blackberry type of fruity acidity on the back of your palate as you're swallowing. I love that. My COO, she hates African coffees and likes Mexican and Central American coffees, so she's going towards tacos and chimichanga.
There's a Guatemalan pastry shop in Reno, and they do these crispy biscuits. They're not great on their own. You dip them in coffee. It's all I've got.
You know what? I do remember something. It's a family thing. My dad always dipped a biscotti in his coffee. Oh, that brought me home to Italy.
Well, that wraps it up. Let's have a huge round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for spending the evening with us.